አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ ጊዜያዊ ጥቅምን አምቢኝ ብለው የዘመመን ሊያቀና እውነትና እውቀትን አስከትሎ ኢኮኖሚያዊና መንፈሳዊ መረጃዎችን እንካችሁ ይላል። ትኩስ ዜናዎች፣ ዘጋቢ ፊልሞች፣ ጥልቅ ትንታኔዎች በአደባባይ ሚዲያ ይቀርባሉ። ራእያችን ጊዜውን ያማከለና ዘመኑን የዋጀ በእውነት የነጠሩ መረጃዎችን በእውቀት ደግፎ ለሀገራችን ብሎ ለዓለም ሕዝብ ማዳረስ ነው። አድሬሳችን አደባባይ info@gmail.com፣ በዌብሳይታችን www.adebabai.com። ያግኙን፣ ይርዱን። የሁላችንም ስለሆነች ኢትዮጵያ በአደባባይ እንዘግባለን። አደባባይ ሚዲያ።
አደባባይ ሚዲያ የኔ ነው። አደባባይ ሚዲያ የኔም ነው።
አደባባይ ሚዲያ የኔ ነው።
አደባባይ ሚዲያ የሁላችንም ነው።
የኛ ቤተሰብ አደባባይ ሚዲያን ይመለከታል። የእናንተስ?
Do your parents watch አደባባይ ሚዲያ?
Watch, follow, subscribe and help አደባባይ። አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ።
Welcome everyone from around the world. This is yet another Viewers Digest Sunday program here at Adebabay Media. Thank you for joining us. We have a great program for all of you today. Please, like we always tell you, we need your help to share and like this program, especially share to all your friends, your brothers, your friends that would love to be part of this program and be part of this conversation with all of us. We would like your help. Please share this program. We'll be right with you. Thank you.
አደባባይ ሚዲያ የተለያዩ ወቅታዊ ዜናዎች፣ ውይይቶች፣ አዝናኝና አስተማሪ ዝግጅቶችን በማቅረብ 1 ዓመታትን አስቆጠረ። አደባባይ ሚዲያ ውድ የአደባባይ ሚዲያ ቤተሰቦች እንኳን ለ1ኛ ዓመት በዓላችን በሰላም አደረሰን እያለን በ1 ዓመት ጉዞዎች ከወገንተኝነት በጸዳ በሀገራችን ላይ የተከሰቱ ክስተቶችን በማጋራት ከአድማጭ ተመልካቾች ጋር መልካም ጉዞን አሳልፈናል። ቀጣይ ዓመታትን በሚሰጡን ገንቢ አስተያየቶች እናንተው ጋር ቀርበን የህዝብ ወገንተኝነትን በማሳየት ቀሪ ጉዞአችንን በስኬት ለመቀጠል አደባባይ ሚዲያን ቆርጦ ተነስተዋል። ለምትደግፉን ውድ የአደባባይ ሚዲያ ቤተሰቦች ከልብ እያመሰገንን ቀሪ ዓመታትን እናንተው ጋር ለመስለቅ ድጋፋችሁ ያስፈልገናልና አይለየን እንላለን። የሁላችንም ስለሆነች ኢትዮጵያ በአደባባይ እንዘግባለን። አደባባይ ሚዲያ።
It was in the 1950s, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church started its mission service in the United States. This month, as we celebrate Black History Month, in this program, we will commemorate the ancient church known by many historians as the African Church of the world, the Black Church of the world, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. How far has the Ethiopian Orthodox Church come since its beginning? What can we learn from its history and do better in the present and in the future as we prepare to hand this beautiful and ancient Church of Christ to the new generation? Today, I think we have the perfect person for this conversation. His name is Diakon Salamon Kibriye. Many of us might know him from his short and deep, but yet informative posts about Ethiopian history and church history on Facebook. He is a deacon in the first Ethiopian Orthodox Church consecrated in America at Debre Medanit Medanialem, Bronx, New York. Diakon Salamon is also a historian and a writer. But today you will find out that Diakon Salamon has not only written about history, but he has been part of history. We will find out what I mean by that. But let me first introduce my brother Diakon Salamon. It is a pleasure to be with you. How are you?
Thank you, Deacon Ephraim. I'm very honored to be on your show. I'm very grateful.
Thank you, Diakon Salamon. It is also my pleasure, and this is one of my favorite topics that we are raising today. Tell us first, before we dive in into our conversation, tell us a little bit about Diakon Solomon, where he was, where you were born and raised.
Okay. Well, I was born and raised in Adebabay, Ethiopia. I was born in the late 60s, and I was born into my father's name is Kibriye. He was a fairly well-known jeweler and goldsmith. My mother's name is Nardos Shifabao, and I was raised from an early age going to Holy Trinity Cathedral. My father was very active in various activities at Holy Trinity Cathedral. He was the person who actually built the high altar. He was commissioned by His Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie to build the high altar. And I was raised there. I became a deacon there at Holy Trinity. And I served there as a boy deacon until I moved to the United States at age 13. And I've lived in the US since. Initially, I was in southern New Jersey, going to school, living with my aunt and uncle there. But then eventually, when I finished high school, I moved to New York City, and I started serving at Medhani Adam Church. At the time, we were at Riverside Church in the west side of Manhattan, and I served there ever since. And I am a longtime New Yorker now, and I've served as a deacon at the church since that time.
Before we get to your history in Bronx, let's go back to Ethiopia. Tell us your journey of how you ended up becoming a deacon, and not only a deacon. I mean, every church is equal to Christ, of course, but in one of the most historic cathedrals in Ethiopia, one of the biggest and historic cathedral, how did you become a deacon in ቅድስት ሥላሴ? And we're gonna share very historic pictures that you have that I'm always I'm jealous of when I look at. We're going to talk about that, but tell us your journey on how you became a deacon in that church.
Sure. So like I said, my father was very active at Holy Trinity Cathedral. He built the altar. He had been commissioned by the emperor. And because of his work, he did a lot of work for the imperial palace. He did a lot of work for the patriarchate. So he knew a lot of the people at the Beit HaKadet, the patriarchate. He knew the patriarchs, etc. At the time of the revolution in Ethiopia in 1974, when the monarchy was abolished, and soon after, not long after, Patriarch Abuna Theophilus of blessed memory was deposed and imprisoned. And what happened was there was a huge problem. Deacons would go on strike and refuse to actually officiate unless so and so is removed from the administration of the cathedral and so on. They were practicing labor tactics, which they were seeing throughout the country during the time of the revolution. And because of that, there were lots of problems. Several Lika Sultanats, or deans of the cathedral, had been removed from their post because of this issue.
Okay, so I'm sorry, were the deacons striking against the Kahanat, the priest, or
I mean, I don't want to mention specific names, but His Eminence Abuna Melchizedek was, Abba Habta Mariam at the time, Lika Sultanat Abba Habta Mariam. He was the dean of the cathedral for many years. As you know, he was imprisoned almost immediately when the imperial government fell. So after him, there were a succession of clerics, of fathers who had been appointed as Lika Sultanat of Holy Trinity Cathedral, but there had been strikes by deacons for them to be removed for various reasons. So the faithful were becoming very concerned. It was a disruption to the regular service of the cathedral. So what they did, my father and others decided, well, we can't have this go on. This is a very untraditional way of becoming a deacon. But they took us, boys, their sons, they took us to His Holiness, Abuna Tekle Haymanut, Patriarch Abuna Tekle Haymanut, and had him ordain us. So that when the deacons went on strike, and said that they wouldn't serve, they would bring us out, and we would stand in for the deacons that refused to serve. This completely stopped that trend. The strikes stopped because we were not paid. We were unpaid deacons. We never. So it never occurred to us to strike. It was just unthinkable. We were, just there as deacons.
It was the elders that were leading it.
Yes. Okay. So we. So I've been serving ever since. I've always been an unpaid deacon. Medhanelem for a short time, especially when I was a student in New York. Medhanelem would give me an allowance for transportation, but I refused it after a while because it is in my tradition to be an unpaid deacon, because the very reason I became a deacon was, to prevent things like that from happening.
I agree with you, and I grew up a deacon as well, as you know. I was 12 years old, and which takes me to the next question. When did you find yourself understanding the depth of Orthodoxy? Because, as we all know, that wouldn't happen the first day, like you mentioned. No. There, you just found yourself, of course, through the grace and will of God, we find out in our journey. But we weren't, we weren't at 12. You wouldn't know, let alone becoming a deacon, let alone the depth of Orthodoxy. We don't know nothing. So when did you find yourself in depth of understanding Orthodoxy? And brothers and sisters, the flash of picture that you've just seen, this is one of the really great pictures. Because I honestly have been studying Abuna Taklaimanut, his life and his contribution to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. His contribution still to this day is touched upon the church. I mean, look at all the amazing archbishops. Both of the patriarchs that we have today have been ordained by Qudus Abuna Taklaimanut. And as we know, and Dr. Solomon will help me on this, even though every part of Ethiopian Orthodox Church has been a hurdle and a struggle, especially at his year, the government itself was against the concept of religion. Having him as a spiritual father at that time had really been great for the church, and the right person, the right father. And tell us a little bit about that picture. How did you, and also, again, I'm sorry, I'm asking two questions at the same time, but when did you start understanding the deepness of Orthodoxy? And tell us about that picture as well, your relationship with Abatachin.
Sure. Well, let me start with the first question. Orthodoxy, understanding Orthodoxy is a process. Like you said, you don't just get in it on day one. As a child, my father was a regular churchgoer, and by regular churchgoer, I don't mean like Sundays. He went every day. He went to church every day. Weekdays, if he was busy and he had a lot of work, he would kiss Holy Trinity's door before going to work. But most days that he could, he would attend Qadasi daily. Saturday, absolutely, every Saturday. Sunday, he went to church. So often, especially on the weekends, he would take me with him. And as a little boy, you can imagine, I wasn't thrilled about the idea of getting up in the morning and going with him to church. But once I was there, I was taken in with the ceremony and the beauty of the ceremony and the singing, the chanting, the liturgy, and it became more and more ingrained in my person. Also, I attended a school initially in Ethiopia called the Good Shepherd School. It was a missionary-run school, and they didn't have Amharic classes. There was a large contingent of Ethiopian kids that attended the school, but instruction was in English. So because my parents didn't want me to not know my language, we had deacons come to the house most Saturdays to teach us, and not just Amharic, but the Bible and the liturgy and just everything that we would need to know to be good Ethiopian Orthodox Christians. So it was a process. It was a process of learning and practice that got me anchored in my faith, which leads on to, with all this instruction we were receiving from the deacons and the problems that were going on in the church at the time, My father, who had, he had known Abuna Theophilos well. I met Abuna Theophilos once when I was very little, but I don't remember. I was too young. But when Abuna Theophilos, the patriarch, was imprisoned, and Abuna Tekle Haymanot became patriarch, he developed a good relationship with His Holiness. So he was very friendly with Abuna Tekle Haymanot of Blessed Memory. And
were you a deacon when you met Abuna Theophilos?
No, I wasn't. I was not a deacon. I was a very small child when I met Abuna Theophilos.
Are you sure you haven't met Abuna Basilios either? I mean,
he
you have everyone on tag.
I'm fairly certain I did not meet him. When I was around, he was already quite ill, and mostly at Debre Libanos at that point. But I was definitely around when Abuna Theophilos became patriarch. I don't remember that much either, but I was around. But Abuna Tekle Haymanot, as you described, was really a godsend for the Ethiopian Orthodox Church at a very, very critical and difficult time. When Abuna Theophilos was imprisoned, the Derg, held required a new patriarch to be elected, and when they chose a patriarch, I think they imagined that someone who was so secluded from the world, Abuna Tekle Haymanot was a Bahatawi. He had lived most of his time in Walaita. He was actually from Gondar, but he lived mostly in Walaita, preaching there and building schools and so on, but living a very austere and secluded life in Walaita. And I think they imagined that someone who was so unworldly would not really know what to do or how to lead a church of the size of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. And they probably thought in their Marxist ideology that they could weaken the church by putting someone like Abuna Tekle Haymanot on the patriarchal throne. But it was actually the opposite. He was such a holy person and so firm in his faith and such a shining example of what a father to the church should be, that he actually, I think, I can very safely say that the church attendance probably quadrupled during his reign. I mean, the churches were packed. People were very faithful. People were very prayerful. And, there was a lot going on in Ethiopia. We went through the Red Terror and the White Terror and, famines and wars. People became exiled and poured out into the diaspora, during that time. It began then. And so people turned to their faith, and he was a great example and father for that. So I first met Abuna Tekle Haymanot when I was taken by my father to meet him to be blessed. And then, we went to see him pretty regularly. My father was very close with him, and we would often go with my father to be blessed. And eventually I was ordained by His Holiness. Interestingly, Abuna Tekle Haymanot's vicar, or his patriarchal vicar, or Abuna Qasis, was Abba Tekle Mariam Asrat, who actually signed my ordination papers. And of course, Abba Tekle Mariam Asrat today is Biswa Qudus Abuna Matthias. So I've actually met every patriarch of Ethiopia except Abuna Basilios. So he actually signed my ordination papers. But that photograph that you showed, my father had taken us to visit His Holiness, and His Holiness would routinely take out these little crosses, little wood or plastic crosses from his pocket and hand them to people who visited. And I'm shown there in that photograph receiving my cross from him. I think I have 2 or 3 from him, which I keep locked away.
That's an amazing story, Brother Dagon Salamon. I'm just intrigued in it. I'm wondering, as you know, at the time, again, all the fathers are just like every part of, especially the member of the Holy Synod, the fathers are all huge figures of the time that are still, means a lot to all of us. For example, Abuna Kostos, that is still alive. Most of his ordination, most of his work is still part of the the growth and mission of the church today. I wonder if have you met Abuna Gorgorios? the late Abuna Gorgorios?
Yes, I did.
Tell us a little bit about him. What do you remember about him at the time?
I remember, it's interesting what children remember. I was still a boy, a very young boy, when I was serving at Holy Trinity. But one of the advantages of serving at Holy Trinity Cathedral is that I met a lot of very prominent bishops who would come for various holidays and even just regular Sundays to worship there. Abuna Gorgorios was certainly one of them. My impression of him, he was very kindly. He was very big. He was physically a big man. And I was very impressed by him. He exuded holiness, and yet at the same time, he was very simple. And I remember that. Of course, he was at Zoe most of the time. He was only at Holy Trinity occasionally.
Yeah.
I have much bigger or much more vivid memories of people like, we're going back, the Abuna Philippos of Jerusalem, who had been retired by the Derg and brought back. And he, of course, is a great and very holy father who did a lot in Jerusalem. And I remember him very distinctly. My first assignment as a deacon when I went into the Magdas was to stand by Abuna Philippos and hold his staff for him during Gadasi, while he blessed the Gadasi. And he doted on me. He actually gave me a couple of his books that he had written. He signed them. They were way over my head at the time. I was very young, but I'm very blessed that I got to be blessed by Abuna Philippos. Also, Abuna Athanasios, who was the first Archbishop of North and South America, was also another prelate that I met at that time. He was also at Holy Trinity Cathedral quite regularly. Abuna Timotheos, who's still a very good family friend, was there. He Holy Trinity. He was a long time.
Abuna Athanasios was the first bishop sent to America?
Yes.
Not Abuna Isaac?
No, he was before Abuna Isaac.
Abuna Athanasios of Wallo? Or
he was born in Wallo. His name was Abba Gabriel Jesus, and he goes back. He was born in the late 1800s sometime.
No, the Abuna Athanasios that is in Wallo right now.
No.
That's okay.
No. The Abuna Athanasios I'm speaking of passed away long ago.
Okay.
I think in the mid 70s, the latest. He was Abba Gabriel Jesus. He was actually the priest who took the Tabot of Maskazonad Medhanialem from Jerusalem to Bath in England for His Majesty for the
during exile.
Yeah, for them to have religious services in Bath during the exile in 1936. Actually, 1937. He had spent many years in Egypt, and he spoke English and Arabic fluently. So when Abuna Basilios sent the first missions to the West, he was one of the fathers that came.
Wow. I always thought it was Abuna Theophilos, as before he became patriarch, he was sent to the United States.
Yeah, Abuna Theophilos was actually the regent for the church at the time, because Abuna Basilios was very ill the second half of his patriarchy. But Abba Gabriel Jesus came to the West, and mostly in the Caribbean. He traveled around. He established churches in Trinidad, Tobago, Guyana, many churches, and baptized a lot of people. And he was initially here in New York. When he came to New York, he was at Holy Trinity, which is also in the Bronx, not far from Medhanialem. And that was a church that was purchased in 1954, I believe, with funds sent by the emperor. And he was in charge of that church. And when he was elevated to becoming Bishop of North and South America by Abuna Theophilos. And he was here in the U.S. He was as bishop for, I think, 5 or 6 years before he was retired with all the archbishops that were retired at the time when Abuna Theophilos was imprisoned. And he went back to Ethiopia. And that's when Abuna Isaac became Archbishop of North and South America. So he was actually preceded by Abu Athanasius.
Yeah, and we'll get to the missions in America in our next program. But before, in our next segment, but before, if we could show the picture that we just saw, please mesmerize my audience as you have amazing mesmerized me. When I first saw this picture, I just thought it was just another historic picture. But please tell us about this very, very historical picture that I bet no one could know if I ask who is in this picture, other than our little brother Diakon Solomon at the time. Tell us about this picture.
Yeah, so you can see me front and center there. I'm the nervous-looking boy with the purple cloak on my shoulders and the robes that are far too big for me. This is on Hamli Selassie, the feast day of Holy Trinity Cathedral in July. Usually falls on July 14 in the Western calendar. And I am there with a fellow boy deacon, and we are walking in front of the Tabotat, the Holy Trinity Tabot. As many of you probably know, the main Tabot at Holy Trinity Cathedral, of course, is Qudus Selassie. There are also the tabots of Kidana Mirat and Johannes Metmuku. And what's really interesting about this picture is the priest carrying the tabot of the Holy Trinity is Abba Zalibanos. And Abba Zalibanos we know today as Patriarch Abuna Mercurius. So he was a monk in the monastery there at Holy Trinity Cathedral, and he was a person who I remember. What I remember the most about Abuna Mercurius, I didn't serve very long with him because soon after he became a bishop and went to his diocese. But what I do remember of Abuna Mercurius as a priest, as a monk, was his incredible voice. His voice really, I mean, there are few voices that I can compare in beauty to Abuna Mercurius's voice in Qudasi. Those of us who have been lucky enough to hear him in Qudasi can attest to how beautifully he sung the Qudasi. He was something else. There are a few people I say that about, and he's definitely one of them. But yeah, that was many years ago.
Amazing. Again, brothers and sisters, the father in the middle, before this picture, the other one, the father in the middle is our current fourth patriarch of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, Abuna Mercurius. And like our brother explained about his voice, he is the only professor of Dugwa, if I'm not mistaken, right, Diakon Solomon?
That's correct. That's correct.
He is the professor of Dugwa. Not only knows Dugwa, but Dugwa member nabbaru. It's just this picture made me come in tears. First, I was jealous of you for with your Abuna Tekle Haymanot picture that was already historic, and then seeing this, honestly, like how our fathers were always lived that humble life. I know you said the only thing you remember about our father is his beautiful voice, and was he part of the church, just like a servant of the church in Qudus Selassie, or?
Absolutely, he was. That's how I remember him. He was, he was one of the many monks there. However, he was very respected for his knowledge. When Abuna Tekle Haymanot became patriarch and he was charged with appointing new bishops, since so many of the old bishops and archbishops were retired, in that first group of, I believe it was 14 bishops that he consecrated on one day, Abuna Mercurius was one of them, and another one was Abuna Matthias, who's the current co-patriarch. So both of them were consecrated on the same day. I remember that ceremony very vividly. Because I
1971 Ethiopian calendar, right?
Yes. We'd never seen so many bishops at the same time in one location. So actually, that photograph is I believe the same year that he became an archbishop. The picture that you see him there carrying the tabut was the same year that he became a bishop.
Wow. Even though I don't have a picture to boast, I have met Biswa Qudus Abuna Merqorios as a child too, and he came to consecrate South Dakota Kidana Mirat. I was given the task to be his Betra Muse holder when he sits down after a blessing, but I have no pictures, unfortunately, to show like you. That's an amazing picture, Diakon Solomon. Brothers and sisters, Adebabay Media family and members, thank you for tuning in and being with all of us. Again, we ask you to please keep sharing this wonderful conversation with your community and people around you. We will be right back after this advertisement. Thank you.
አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ ጊዜያዊ ጥቅምን አምቢኝ ብሎ የዘመመን ሊያቀና እውነትና እውቀትን አስከትሎ ኢኮኖሚያዊና መንፈሳዊ መረጃዎችን እንካችሁ ይላል። ትኩስ ዜናዎች፣ ዘጋቢ ፊልሞች፣ ጥልቅ ትንታኔዎች በአደባባይ ሚዲያ ይቀርባሉ። ራእያችን ጊዜውን ያማከለና ዘመኑን የዋጀ በእውነት የነጠሩ መረጃዎችን በእውቀት ደግፎ ለሀገራችን ብሎም ለዓለም ሕዝብ ማዳረስ ነው። አድሬሳችን አደባባይ ኢንፎ ሚዲያ @gmail.com ዌብሳይታችን www.adebabay.com ያግኙን፣ ይርዱን። የሁላችንም ስለሆነች ኢትዮጵያ በአደባባይ እንዘግባለን። አደባባይ ሚዲያ
Adebabay media የኔ ነው። Adebabay media የኔም ነው።
Adebabay media የኔ ነው።
Adebabay media የሁላችንም ነው።
የኛ ቤተሰብ Adebabay ሚዲያን ይመለከታል። የእናንተስ?
Do your parents watch Adebabay media?
Watch, follow, subscribe and help Adebabay. Adebabay media ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ።
We are back. Thank you, brothers and sisters. We've been having a great conversation with Diakon Solomon on Ethiopian Orthodox Church Apostolic Missionary and its challenges. Since this month we are commemorating Black History Month here in the United States, we wanted to take a look back on EOTC's Apostolic Mission since its inception around 1950s. We've been talking with Diakon Solomon about his upbringing in Ethiopia and his journey as a deacon in Ethiopia. Now we're going to start coming here towards his journey in the United States. Tell us a little bit about your American journey. I know you mentioned that you came right in New York. And how did you find the first service, the first years in America as a deacon? Did you think that you would find yourself serving the church still in the United States? Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so as I stated earlier, I moved to the U.S. At the age of 13. At the time, things were really bad in Ethiopia. They were conscripting very young kids into the military, and people who had the means or the opportunity were sending their children abroad. And that happened to me. My brother and I came to live in the U.S. We have an aunt and uncle who live in southern New Jersey. So we went to live with them. They are my second parents. I stayed there through high school. I went to a Roman Catholic high school in South Jersey. I learned quite a bit there. Similarities and parallels in faith. It made my Orthodox faith, I think, a little stronger than it was, but it was very interesting. But then I moved to New York, and it coincided with a visit from Ethiopia by my father, who said, let's go to church. The first weekend I was in New York, he said, let's go to church. So we found Medhane Alem, which was at Riverside Church at the time on the west side. It is a very large institution. We went to Medhane Alem and attended Qadasi. And, it was a new church. It had not been a full year since it had been established. And my father got up and said at the breakfast after the service and said, my son is a deacon, so here he is. He's yours now. And Abuna Paulos at the time was he was the founder of New York Medhane Alem, and he was studying at Princeton Theological Seminary, and he would come to New York on weekends to serve at the church. And he took me under his wing, and I served as a deacon under Abuna Paulus, who was later Patriarch Abuna Paulus. And I served with him for many years. And you see me there in that picture. That's my mother and our cousin. That's on the other side of Abuna Paulus. This was an Easter service. After Easter services, Abuna Paulus would take me around the entire church with that bowl with Zabal and bless the crowds with it. And someone snapped this.
Is this Hosanna Day or?
This is actually Easter. This is actually he did that at Easter as well. There were back then there were only two churches in New York City. One was Holy Trinity in the Bronx, and the other was Medhanelem. Holy Trinity the services were mostly in English. So most of the Ethiopian community would come to Medhanelem, and the services were really well attended. And so at the end of the service, rather than have every single person come up to him to be blessed with a cross or to kiss his hand, he would use holy water to bless the crowds. That way he could bless larger numbers in a shorter period of time. So that was that.
I don't know. Thank you. Here, my next question is, I think I have an assumption that you've become so much interested in history because you lived history without knowing it. God blessed you in being part of even the pictures that we've seen. What made you? Is it that what made you interested in the EOTC history, that you just found yourself in it because of your father's background and all of that, or what made you interested in continuing in history when you came to the United States?
That played a very big role in it. The fact that I did know all these figures and I did meet them, the patriarchs that I met, the archbishops that I met. And when you serve at a place like Holy Trinity Cathedral, you absorb a lot of the history there. The people buried in the graveyard there are all exiles or resistant fighters from the fascist occupation. So just walking through the cemetery and reading the tombstones, you learn a lot of history. The imperial family are buried there in the crypt under the church. And a lot of their robes and Empress Menen's tiaras and lots of historic items are stored in that church. So I absorbed that, and it's fascinating, and it deepened my interest in history. I was also lucky to be around a lot of people who knew a lot of history and were willing to share history with me. People, growing up, my father's very close friends, who were like secondary fathers to me. People like Professor Nebiat Tafari, Professor Asrat Waldayas. These are people who were very, very grounded in their faith in the church, had a lot of knowledge about the church, and also history. Professor Asrat, his son was my friend since kindergarten, and we often went on vacations together. He would take me along with his son to.
So they were part of Bronx, the same church?
No, at Selassie in Ethiopia.
In Ethiopia, okay.
In Ethiopia, and he would read to us from books of Ethiopian history. I remember particularly Dr. Henry Blank's history of the Magdala War with Emperor Theodorus. He was a hostage during that time. That English book had been translated into Amharic, and he would read it to us in Amharic and have us read it to him, chapters to him, so we would practice our Amharic with him. But here in the U.S., I'm glad you brought that up. Here in New York, our church, Medhanelem, was home to people like Abuna Paulus, who had been in prison under the Derg and knew a lot of the people that were in prison and knew a lot of the stories and the history of what happened in prison. And he shared that pretty liberally with us. But also we had at our church, the first chairman of our church was Dejazmach Zode Gebrselassie, who many viewers might know, was a very, very prominent figure. He was a stepson to the Crown Prince. He was a professor at Oxford, I believe. He was also foreign minister of Ethiopia, the justice minister of Ethiopia. He was the He was mayor of Adebabay at some point, and he's a great grandson of Emperor Johannes IV, and a person who lived history and knew a lot of history, and I think wrote the definitive book about the definitive biography about his great grandfather Emperor Johannes. He was at our church, and he was very kind to me, very, very willing to answer any history questions I had. Told me lots of interesting stories about all sorts of historical figures, and a man of great humor and intelligence. Was a very wonderful person to know. Another person that was at our church was Dejazmach Ammahaberra, whose father, Dejazmach Aberra Casa, was one of the people that the Italians killed. He was the grandson of Ras Kasahailu, Luel Ras Kasahailu. So these were people, and he also was very generous with his time in telling me about different histories, particularly about his mother, Mavitoi Kabedich who was Arbenya, a patriot fighter in her own right during the fascist occupation. So I was lucky. I was very lucky in the people around me that were willing to share all this information and willing to answer, questions from a pestering little boy. So I was very lucky in that. My father was, knew a lot of history, knew a lot of figures, and he also helped instill a lot of the love of history in me. And I like to read. I read a lot of books, Amharic, English, and not just Ethiopian history, but European history, dynastic history from all over the world interested me. And as you said, I lived a lot of history. I lived at a time in Ethiopia when there was a lot of upheaval because of the revolution, upheaval in the country, upheaval in the church. And then I moved here to the U.S. and there was a different upheaval. It was a new community when I moved here, a new community of exiles who all had this dream of returning. And so everything felt very temporary, but the longer it took, the longer we were here, the more settled in we became. There was just a lot happening here. And we, as the way things developed, of course, there was the huge schism, the split in our church, and all the things that came with that. So I lived a lot of history, and I was aware, because of all the history I'd absorbed. I knew that all the events happening were momentous. So of course, it deepened my interest even more.
Yeah, Deacon Solomon, thank you. And I believe this, we'll talk about the schism, which I believe, even though God, with the will of God and his forgiveness, we have come over it, I feel like we're still going to face some kind of schism if we don't at least start to act the way that our fathers had injured and had acted. We'll talk about that, but before we get into what's going on right now, tell us a little bit about the inception of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church Missionary in the United States. When it comes to history, let's talk a little bit about how did it first begin.
As we discussed earlier, Abuna Basilios and Abuna Theophilos, patriarchs, sent missionaries into the West to preach to the people here. When they sent the fathers to the West to teach, at the time there were very few Ethiopians in the West, and in the target at the time were the English-speaking people of the Caribbean mostly, and African Americans in North America. The reason that they were targeted for the missions, was the emperor was very concerned. Emperor Haile Selassie was very concerned about the development in the Caribbean of Rastafarianism and what it meant as in relation to our church. So he sent the initial fathers to the West to preach to this community, to spread Ethiopian Orthodoxy among these people who absolutely adored him. He wanted them on the path to Orthodoxy. So that's why those fathers were sent. And in the US, in North America, during the Italian occupation, African Americans did a great deal towards supporting the Ethiopian cause, whether it was financially or through propaganda, through information, within the rather restricted ability that they had, being themselves an oppressed people. They did a lot to help, and the emperor and the Orthodox Church fathers at the time recognized that this was an opportunity to bring more people into the church, to broaden the reach of the Orthodox Church. So fathers were sent. I mentioned Abba Gabriel Jesus, who later became His Eminence Abuna Athanasius. And he in particular, if you go to South America, to Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, you'll hear a lot about Abuna Athanasius. He was a true missionary. He had spent many years in Egypt, and then from Egypt he was at Qusqum in Egypt, in the monastery there. And then he moved to Jerusalem in the Holy Land, and he was fluent in Arabic and in English. So it was an opportunity to send him to an English-speaking country for missionary work, and he was very successful. There are families even now who trace in Guyana and in Trinidad, who trace their conversion to Abuna Athanasius, and they really, really revere him. He also came here to the U.S. Holy Trinity Church here in New York, in the Bronx, was established by His Imperial Majesty in 1954. It's the oldest church in the U.S., Ethiopian Orthodox Church in the U.S.
That's where I was confused. I think I did hear on the Trinidad. Maybe I mixed it with. I thought it was Abuna Theophilus instead of Abuna Athanasius. But who was the father that came with King Haile Selassie to consecrate the first church in Bronx?
I think Abuna Theophilus was the first bishop to visit New York. Well, he was archbishop at the time. He may have been patriarch by then. But he was the first to visit New York, and he definitely blessed the church there. But the church was purchased long before, in 1954, when Abuna Basilios was archbishop at the time, not quite patriarch yet. He was the archbishop of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church under the Coptic Patriarchate. But the church was established back in the 50s, and it is the first Ethiopian Orthodox Church in North America. Now, the church I serve at, was established jointly, actually, by Abuna Yitzhak, who is Archbishop of North and South America at the time.
So the first church.
Our church, the second church in New York. It was established.
I thought your church was the first. So that's
no. Holy Trinity is the first, is the oldest. We were established. Madhani Adam was established in 1984. So a good 3 decades after Bronx and Selassie. Madhani Adam, like I said, Selassie was mostly for English-speaking people. The liturgy was said in English, and Ethiopians would go there. And as the Ethiopian community grew, they wanted a church which was, Ge'ez and Amharic rather than Ge'ez and English. I think the majority of people that supported Selassie continued to be Western people, people from the Caribbean, African Americans, and they continued to support that church. But Abuna Yitzhak recognized that the growing Ethiopian community in New York needed its own church. So he jointly with Abuna Paulus had been freed from prison and had come back to the U.S. to finish the doctoral degree that he had started before the revolution. He had come to finish. So they jointly established New York Madhani Adam. And Abuna Paulus continued to lead the church until the time that he returned to Ethiopia to become patriarch in the early 90s. But so we were the second oldest in New York.
So when the first church was consecrated, there weren't a lot of Ethiopians then. Is that why there were a lot of more African Americans and Jamaicans? Okay.
Jamaicans, people generally from the Caribbean, Trinidadians, and Jamaicans and Guyanese, some of whom still come to our church, to Madhanyalem, and still attend Holy Trinity. They're descendants as well. But at the time that Selassie was Holy Trinity was established in the Bronx, there were very few Ethiopians in New York. Really, Ethiopians in the U.S. in general really didn't start growing in numbers until after the revolution in 1974, which was about 20 years after the church was established.
And I believe the schism as well in the middle had made a split between the two churches, Madhanyalem and the first old Holy Trinity Church, right?
Yes. So the split goes back a little further. Even before the schism, there were tensions. Abuna Isaac, whose picture you had just had on the screen, was the archbishop, the official archbishop of North and South America. His official seat, his member was Holy Trinity, and that's where he stayed. Abuna Paulos was the bishop for ecumenical affairs in Ethiopia before he was imprisoned. He came to the U.S. to finish his degree, and he never went back while the Derg was in power. So there was a kind of, it wasn't official, but there was kind of a split between the official church under Abuna Isaac and the exiles who went to Madhanyalem. So, it wasn't official, it wasn't written anywhere or declared anywhere, but the identity was that people that came to Selassie were, more official, connected directly to the synod in Ethiopia, whereas people at Madhanyalem, we were, exiles, refugees, and people that, were connected. There were embassy people who came to
so like the Gereltanya Church, even though it's not officially, it kind of started before the one we know of.
Definitely.
Abuna Mercoros and Abuna Paulos.
Definitely.
It started during.
And that's exactly it. So when the official schism came after Abuna Paulos became patriarch and Abuna Mercurios went into exile, and the synod was set up in exile, and there was a synod in Addis. That split happened, and Madhanyalem, our church, and many other churches in the U.S. who had been established as kind of away from the official structure, became neutral. So there were actually, the schism was a three-way schism, which was very, very dangerous, actually, when you think back. There was an official church, there was a Addis Ababa church, there was a exile church, and then there was this group of neutral churches. And New York Madhanyalem was a neutral church for much of the split.
And many of American diaspora churches were mostly independent. I grew up in one as well. Like growing up, I was 12 years old when I was ordained. That's the only church structure I know of.
Yes.
It's called independent, but like you said, there's a lot of good connection until like a further amount when when the fathers ordained their own here. It was a little bit, at least, there was some closeness to them, but I grew up in that environment. You're right.
Yes. And I think a lot of it came from the way our churches in the diaspora were set up initially. In order to maintain control away from what they perceived as Derg influence, because they felt that the Derg was oppressing the church in Ethiopia, to establish a remove from Derg influence. They set up the churches in a way that the board of trustees of these churches were were in authority over the church, which put the clergy in an interesting position in that they are now basically employees of the board. So who do they obey? Who do they report up to? Is it the bishop? Is it the exile bishop? Is it the bishop that's assigned from Addis, or is it the board? So there was a conflict there, and I think it's a conflict that's never really been resolved. The churches that were established by the Addis Synod have always been under the structure of the archbishop being an authority over them, right? But the churches, both of the Exile Synod, the former Exile Synod and the former Neutral Group, have been set up with these kind of amorphous structures that don't make it clear who they report to. So the danger there, in my view anyway, is that in the future, anytime there's some kind of problem, because you never see these problems in Ethiopia. You don't, something happens that everyone follows what the church, what the synod.
That is what's really sad about anything that happens in Ethiopia affects us more here.
It affects us more here because people will come out here and say, "Hey, I've split away," and so and so church says, "Oh, we're following him," and
because the system allows it here.
There's no structure to prevent that because we are dependent on the views of people that we elect to our boards. Parishioners now have an authority that might not necessarily be what was intended by the fathers of the church. And it's caused problems.
Do you think one thing that's in my mind now that I think about it? Do you think that problem came? Again, we can't really blame our fathers and even the king because he's done enough for us even to give us a church, consecrate a church here. Even at a time that African Americans were not even treated equally in the United States. So that's a great deal for us, and it would have been a great opportunity for us to do a lot of missionary work for African Americans and everyone within the church. But when that church was consecrated at the time, do you think the problem came at the time? Why not have the same structure that it belongs in Ethiopia? Make sure that it's the same when it's built in the United States instead of just giving it to individual board members. Do you think the problem started there? Should the structure should have at least started at the time of at least Abuna Isaac's time?
The problem came later, I think. When the church, when Holy Trinity was established, it was established along the lines of any Ethiopian Orthodox church. It was to report to the Holy Synod. And when a bishop was appointed, when Abuna Athanasios came as the first bishop, it reported to him, and all the churches in the Western Hemisphere reported to him. The problem came when Abuna Athanasios was recalled to Ethiopia. Abuna Yitzhak became archbishop here. And then we had churches who did not want to fall under, or communities within the church that did not want to fall under the authority of the Derg. So they set up churches outside the official structure. Abuna Yitzhak happened to participate in the establishment of Medhan Adam. But then, relations kind of loosened. There are many churches which were established during Abuna Yitzhak's tenure as the official Archbishop of North and South America, that were established without his authority, and were established, and the presence of other bishops, exiled bishops. At the time, Abuna Matias was in Washington, D.C. Abuna Paulus was here in New York. Abuna Paulus was not officially an exile. He was here to study, basically. Abuna Matias was an exile. He denounced the Derg and came, and he was leading an exiled church, an officially exiled church. So anytime there are other bishops within the bishop's jurisdiction establishing churches, it loosens the structure. They did great work. Abuna Matias did amazing things in Washington, establishing Medhan Adam Church there, and the mother church for all the churches in that region. Abuna Paulus did the same here. He also opened churches in California and opened churches in Texas. But it's a memory of people from that period that often there were court cases established because the official church said, well, these are not officially sanctioned by the bishop, the official archbishop, and they shouldn't use the name of Ethiopian Orthodox. There were actual court cases, which was a precursor to the later split that happened when the EPRDF came to power in Ethiopia and Abuna Markorios came into exile. And then we had an official split. And then, things degenerated. But the problem actually predates the actual split. And, we should be concerned that doesn't carry on, that we have put in place structures to prevent, like you said, something happens in Ethiopia and people there are completely unaffected, but it has a huge impact on our churches here in the West.
Yeah, very well said. And so coming back to now, in retrospect, what were some of the greatest deeds of our fathers that were done at the time? We know, like, we haven't really talked about it enough, of course, because now we're talking about the challenges and we talked more about the schism, but there's no denying that during the time of Abuna Yitzhak, imagine a full church. I haven't visited New York, the first church, but fathers like Qassis Saifa Selassie, that's our father today, and many deacons and fathers came out of that, came out of Abuna Yitzhak's apostolic mission. He's baptized, if I'm not mistaken, more than 50,000 Jamaicans around the world, and I'm just putting that out there, like that's the least amount. Yeah. And this includes Bob Marley and his family, and basically even the people of Jamaica took his holy body and said, he belongs to us, not to you.
And he really is the missionary for Jamaica. He was the missionary for Jamaica. He did so much work there. He was among those initial priests that were sent to the West. And the thing about Abuna Yitzhak is that he was an archbishop, but at the same time he was very simple, very direct. He was very much a man of the people. So they could relate to him. He was approachable. He was easy to talk to. So he was definitely the type of person who would have a massive impact like that. He did a lot of work, especially in the Caribbean. He did a lot of work there. It was true missionary work that really hasn't been replicated since. You mentioned Qassis Saifa Selassie, who I have immense respect for. He's a young, dynamic priest that comes directly out of that missionary zeal. There are other priests in the West. There's St. Michael's Church in New Jersey, which is within our diocese here, is almost entirely people of West Indian and African American descent, and they are people who are very devoted to the faith and who do a lot of work. I think a lot more could have been done, but the focus changed. After 1974, when large numbers of Ethiopians started immigrating to the US because of what was going on back home, and then again, newer waves after the 1990s, the Ethiopian population quickly outstripped the African American and Afro-Caribbean population. So the focus of the church fathers turned to ministering to the Ethiopian population, and sadly, the mission to the English-speaking population suffered. I think the focus became on, let's go ahead and teach them Amharic. Let's go ahead and teach them Ge'ez, and that will bring them into the church. But I think English service suffered until more recently, when the younger generation of Ethiopian Americans, who perhaps aren't as conversant in Amharic and don't understand Ge'ez, when they came forward and the need to minister to them became more prominent, then we see more of a return to the English service. But Abuna Yitzhak definitely was the pioneer in the West into ministering to to the Afro-Caribbean and African-American communities, in the footsteps of Abuna Athanasios, who did that before him.
Exactly, and you answered my second question together of why do you think that missionary didn't continue, was because our father's focus became more on the Ethiopian, Amharic-speaking, Ethiopian native-born Ethiopians. Focus was given more to them than the non-Ethiopians. But I also think, honestly, in my opinion, and from my experience as well, it's not only that, because missionary work is always missionary work is it always starts with one person, right? If one African American, one white American, Asian American, whatever, non-Ethiopian comes, you start with that person, and then it grows eventually that way. And that I say that out of experience. But I think what happened along with the Ethiopian population growing, which is a great thing, it's also the politics side. Because if honestly speaking, even to the Ethiopian, the mission, we've existed at least since the 1950s, and we have hundreds of churches around the states, but we have no school yet. Almost no school. Like now, I haven't heard. There's many traditional schools now being established some places, which is a great sign. But compared to the Coptic Church, now the Coptic Church is 10% of their country. They're very minimal, and with sources, with everything, we know we have the greater aspect of that. But compared to them, compared to the Armenian Church, compared to even the Syrian Church, that's always in political suicide when it comes to what's going on in Syria, they have churches. I mean, they have schools, they have institutions, they have monasteries built for the next generation. So I think it's also the politics side, the schism, which you mentioned twice when you said before the official schism started. That's a very powerful voice, because that's what I feel right now. We are just done with the one schism, but we're awaiting for another one. Look at what's happening right now. Every time one part of region in Ethiopia is hurt, it's only that region that has to be going out and protesting and all of that. We've seen that with Oromia Beta Knet at one time, and now we're seeing it with Tigrayans. It's as if it's part of the church to allow us to think divisively instead of uniting one with the teaching of Orthodoxy. So I think it's the politics, the toxic ethnic divisions that have really been a poison for the mission to grow or to not grow as much as it should. Don't you agree with this, Diakon Solomon?
I absolutely agree. That's very true. It's a very dangerous trend. When the monarchy fell in 1974, one of the first things that the government did was to disestablish the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church as the faith of state. So when that happened, what should have happened was that the church should have become divorced from politics. But now what we see is that politics refuses to divorce itself from the church. So what ends up happening is the problems that happen in the political world are translating into the church. So we have, supporters of so-and-so are trying to take over the board of this church because the church is widely accepted, right? Everyone goes to church. It becomes a mass organization for people with a political background that they can use to further their aims. And so they're using the church as a tool. So like you said, there's this ethnic group wants to have its own Beta Knet, and this province wants to have its own Beta Knet, and these are parallel administrations just outside the traditions of Orthodoxy. There's one synod, there's one patriarchate. To solve the schism, we have two patriarchs sharing the throne, but it's a temporary thing, right? This is to end the schism. They are brother patriarchs, but there's one Beta Knet, there's one synod, there's one church. you can't federalize the church along ethnic lines, along political lines. There isn't a church for, such and such political party or such and such ethnic group. It's just not done. It's not, you cannot divide the body of Christ in that manner. The church is the body of Christ. Christ is not a communist. He's not a capitalist. He's not a socialist. He's not, he doesn't have an ethnic group, an Ethiopian ethnic group. So we shouldn't regard the church in worldly terms. We're talking about our eternal soul, and there's one church, there's one God, there's one Christ. So we have to divorce our political beliefs from our religious beliefs, and that has to be practiced. Otherwise, we're in a lot of danger, I think, because that underlying issue that we've discussed about, that caused the split even before the official split is still there. And, we need to discourage any kind of disunity. Language, use of language is used as a great issue. There's no problem with using different languages. We have an English liturgy. We have an Amharic liturgy. We have an Oromifa liturgy. There's nothing wrong with preaching in Tigrinya.
And we're speaking about the church issue in English. So.
In English. And if we, knew we were fluent enough in French, we could do it in French or German. The word of God is the word of God in any language. What we have to be careful of is that we don't split and divide amongst ourselves along these worldly, earthly divisions. Because when we appear before the Lord in our final judgment, we're not going to be asked what ethnic group we are or what political party card we carry. It becomes meaningless at that point. We all become dust and ashes, and we're buried like everyone else.
Yep, like the Word of God said, there is neither Jew nor Greek in Galatians chapter 3, verse 28. That's it's biblical as well. When we say orthodoxy, when we say hierarchy, we're not only talking about the structure, but it's biblical. There's no Greek or Jew. You don't come to Christ based on your ethnicity. But unfortunately, in this historic, ancient, beautiful church, that's what the trend we're seeing. And unfortunately, what we're dealing with, Diakon Solomon, right now is the new generation, which will be my next question. The youth that have been born within the schism now has a mentality that it's okay, right? That's
right.
The only history they know of Ethiopia is Tigray, Oromia, this and that, and then ethnic divided. And what they see is when fathers only speak if only their own ethnicity is they think is hurt, or their political leaders are being attacked, or they think it's really chaos. It's chaotic, and it's not only the politics side that I'm scared, that is dangerous and I'm scared of, but again, like you mentioned, Ethiopia will always be fine. At least when it comes to Orthodoxy, when it comes to faith, we have fathers like we just mentioned. These fathers, Abuna Matias, Abuna Morokorios, both of the patriarchs. I could go on and on. All the fathers that have been consecrated by Abuna Yitzhak, Abuna Tekla Haymanut, the churches, the monasteries, the lifestyle. All those things will still keep the church strong, the people in Ethiopia. But again, what hurts is here in the United States, that's not the way it is. We don't even have a structure. Anyone could just get up and build its own church and use the EOTC, the EOTC name, but teach on Orthodoxy. It's a mess, and all the mess that happens there, we're the ones that have to deal with it. And it seems as if, as much as I am not a person that believes in accusing someone higher than me, the Holy Synod, but it seems that the Holy Synod has not understood that yet, that the problem, like how much we have been neglected in the United States when it comes to these issues. And the more we neglect, because there's money, there's power, there's the politics side here, there's the so-called freedom here, whatever compounds here will eventually also devour and hurt the church again for another schism.
You took the words right out of my mouth. The problems might be, you know, focused here for now, but in this information age where, you know, social media rules everything, things that happen here in the church outside will ultimately affect the church in Ethiopia as well. People in Ethiopia watch social media voraciously. They see what's being said out here. They follow the stories that they hear from us here. And it's really the Holy Fathers and the Holy Synod really need, in my view, in my humble view, really need to focus on how the church is run and how things are done here. Like you mentioned, somebody might just go off and start their own church. You know, oh, I love Saint so and so. I'm going to start a church. And, you know, I founded it, and here are my friends, and they're the board. And, you know, we don't really like the bishop. We don't like him for X reason. We're not going to fall under his authority. And, you know, these things have happened. They've sent letters to the Patriarchate saying, we don't want so-and-so, which is outside the authority of a board, really. Under our faith, the Holy Synod is who appoints the bishops for each diocese. But there's no official hierarchy instilled in that way. We have priests now who have a dilemma as to whether they obey their board or do they obey the archbishop. There has to be a structure. There has to be a way of delineating what the authority of the bishop is and what the authority of the board is, of the parishioners is. And I think there needs to be a lot of work there because it's not clear. It's not clear. You know, just to go back to the previous point about these splits that seem to happen in our society, you know, where we identify so-and-so as Oromo and so-and-so as Tigrayan and so-and-so as Amara and so on. My father, as I told you, was a jeweler. He built the altar for Holy Trinity Cathedral. He was very devoted to Holy Trinity Cathedral. There were so many churches closer to our home that he could have gone to, but he didn't go anywhere else. He went to Holy Trinity to worship all the time. So he loved that church, and he built the altar. So when he was commissioned to build the altar, he was only about 21, 22 years old. He'd freshly come back from Germany after studying jewelry, and the emperor commissioned him. And the emperor commissioned the altar. It was built. I don't know if you've seen the altar at Holy Trinity Cathedral. It's beautiful. It's all decorated with silver. The pillars are made of ivory. I have. So the emperor was very moved when he saw it, and he commissioned my father to make a second altar. This one for Saint Mary of Zion, Zion Aksum, for the new cathedral. He wanted him to do the same thing for Aksum. So my dad went ahead and built a second altar. And as I said, my father is very devoted to Holy Trinity Cathedral. There's, you know, in his mind, it's the church.
Was he a deacon as well, like you, or
no? He wasn't. His family, he had clergy in his family. His grandparents were all clergy people, but he followed. His father, his grandfather, and so on were all jewelers, goldsmiths. His brother is still actively working in that industry. He's a goldsmith in Ethiopia right now. His name is Yeheyis Dejani. But he built this second altar. And the emperor asked him, so my grandfather had been a jeweler in the palace. So my father grew up learning jewelry in the palace. So he was fairly familiar with the emperor. They knew each other. So the emperor said, so between the altar you built for Holy Trinity and the altar you've built now, which is the better work? He asked him. And my father said, well, this is the second attempt at building an altar. So of course, the work is going to be finer. It's going to be better. So he, being so pro Holy Trinity, thinking it's the place on earth, he said, Janhoy, why don't we keep this altar for Selassie, for Holy Trinity, and we'll take the old one that I built for Holy Trinity, and we can take that to Aksum. And the emperor was shocked. The emperor said, "No, you can't do that." And my father said, "Why?" Because he loved Holy Trinity so much. And the emperor, a lot of people today might think that the emperor would say, "Well, yeah, this is the church I go to regularly, Holy Trinity Cathedral. This is where it should be. This is where I'm going to be buried, right? I plan to be buried in Holy Trinity."
Yeah.
The emperor said, "There is no place in Ethiopia holier than Aksum's Eon." So there's no place in Ethiopia holier. So you have to take the better altar there. So in those days, Aksum was, much smaller than it is now. It was kind of a rural area, really. But the idea of ethnicity or regionalism did not go into the spiritual act. This was an act for God, and this is a holy site. We need to get back to that kind of thinking. This ethnic political division thing is a modern thing, and I think it's a temporary thing. I don't think it's something that will continue. It's ugly and it's bitter right now, but our very long history doesn't have this component. If you asked Emperor Menelik or Emperor Johannes or Emperor Theodorus or Rasa Lula or any of these people about ethnic politics, they'd be bewildered. It's not but people today will take those figures from history and use them to support their ethnic agenda or their political agenda that's completely divorced from who these people were. And I think that's another reason why history is so important, that we realize that things need to be taken in the context of their time. We cannot take things from the past and put them in our present day context because it's not legitimate.
Very well said. Thank you, Diakon Solomon Kibriye. And the unfortunate irony when you were speaking about what King Haile Selassie said about Aksum is the irony, and the unfortunate thing is now these kids from Aksum and these kids, like at least in the diaspora, I'm not talking about there in Ethiopia, it's different, but here they're being taught that King Haile Selassie was their enemy, that he did the same thing that's going on, what they believe is going on now, and that he was against them. That brought tears to my eyes, because one thing I've been doing, especially since this unfortunate war started, I've been reaching out to my Ethiopian Tigrinya speaking brothers and sisters that I grew up in Minnesota, and the amount of, again, not all of them, and it's not their fault, the amount of toxic false history. There's no such thing as alternative facts. Remember the word alternative facts that Kellyanne Conway used when she was asked about Trump?
Yeah.
There's no such thing as alternative facts, but alternative facts is false facts. It's a false thing, and they're teaching them this propaganda. It's an unfortunate thing, and that very opposite of what you said. But it comes back to the history. It comes back to knowing the truth to heal our nation and to resolve the things that needs to be solved, especially immediately here in the United States and the diaspora when it comes to service. Brothers and sisters, we'll be back right after this ad. Please, again, we are not done. We're going to hold Diakon Solomon a little bit, at least 20 more minutes to learn from him and to talk about this really important conversation that we're holding. Please help us share, like, and subscribe if you haven't. If you haven't like and subscribe, but again, please share. And when we say share, it doesn't have to be on Facebook and not only on your Facebook post, but you could send it to your family members on Viber, text message. This is important that it gets to them, because this conversation you should be part of this conversation as well. And the reason we're having these conversations is not to only talk about how unfortunate things are, but to actually bring solution to our problems and move forward as Ethiopians and as Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo members especially. We'll be right back after this advertisement. Thank you.
አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ ጊዜያዊ ጥቅምን አምቢኝ ብሎ የዘመመን ሊያቀና እውነትና እውቀትን አስከትሎ ኢኮኖሚያዊና መንፈሳዊ መረጃዎችን እንካችሁ ይላል። ትኩስ ዜናዎች፣ ዘጋቢ ፊልሞች፣ ጥልቅ ትንታኔዎች በአደባባይ ሚዲያ ይቀርባሉ። ራእያችን ጊዜውን ያማከለና ዘመኑን የዋጀ በእውነት የነጠሩ መረጃዎችን በእውቀት ደግፎ ለሀገራችን ብሎ ለዓለም ሕዝብ ማዳረስ ነው። አድሬሳችን አደባባይ ኢንፎ ሚዲያ @gmail.com፣ በዌብሳይታችን www.adebabai.com። ያግኙን፣ ይርዱን። የሁላችንም ስለሆነች ኢትዮጵያ በአደባባይ እንዘግባለን። አደባባይ ሚዲያ።
Welcome back, Adebabay Media members, Adebabay Media family. We are back on our Viewers Digest program. Thank you for being with us. We've been with Diakon Solomon Kibriye talking about Ethiopian Orthodox Church Missionary here abroad in the United States and its challenges. Again, thank you for being with us. We've been together with him starting from his journey back home all the way to here in the United States. Now, Diakon Solomon, we've been talking about a little bit about the schism that happened. Not little, but a very hard time. 26 years of schism. That's I'm 31 years old, so basically I grew up in it. And when I became a deacon, I was 12 years old in 2001. 2 months after 9/11 happened, is when November 6th, the exact day, and I was consecrated, blessed to be consecrated by Abuna, ordained by Abuna, the late Abuna Zena Marcos. And so I grew up in a Galaltanya environment, Galaltanya church. But again, that's the church that actually built me. And I thank God that regardless of the schism, the Holy Spirit still, of course, resided in the churches, and we were able to still come out of it in His will. But let's talk about your years in no schism. Again, you grew up in Medanyalem, how that affected you personally. And then after that, you know, a lot of times we say there's some moments of history that we remember where we are, exactly if we're either asleep or awake or in school. There's some moments that we remember in our lives where we are at that moment. And that day is the day that the fourth patriarch, Biswa Qudus Abuna Merqorios, was able to go to Ethiopia, and that official unity of the Holy Synod was happening. I remember it like it was yesterday. So let's talk both. How was your life impacted during those times, the times of schism? We kind of talked about it, and what you felt after the unity.
So the schism had a very difficult impact on the clergy, particularly. The faithful, I think, were not quite as affected as clergy. If it was Mariam, they would go to St. Mary's here in New York, which was the Exile Synod Church. And if it's Selassie, they would go to Selassie, which is the official church. And if it's Medanyalem, they'll come here. So for the faithful, there wasn't as big. There was a problem, but it wasn't as big as a problem for the clergy. As a deacon at Medanyalem, I could not go and serve at St. Mary's Church, Mariam Sion here in New York. The priest there, Malaka Gannet Gazahin, I've known since childhood. He was an archdeacon. When I was very little, he was an archdeacon at Holy Trinity. You know, he's famous for his beautiful voice, but I've known him, but I could never serve at the same altar with him. I served here in Medanyalem with great fathers. I mean, I'm very privileged to have served with Risa Maimaran Burhanuddin and Malaka Salam Fissa Mengistu, Malaka Salam Danyacho Kasahun, Kesis Sahai Burhanu. These are very prominent, very learned clergy. But I could never serve with people at other churches, and we were separated. If somebody I knew, if a family member were to pass away and their service was at a church that was in another section of the schism, I could only attend as an attendee. I could never help officiate. So it was, the schism separated us as clergy from each other. And, you know, it was very sad and very tragic. I mean, you know, I'll tell you personally, I absolutely adore Malaka Ganat Gazahin. But I could never serve with him at the altar until after the schism ended. The first time when the schism ended and they had, the Hadar Zion was being celebrated at St. Mary's, I had a personal thing, and so I couldn't attend that service. But I was very lucky that the next day, it was on a Saturday, the next day I was able to, I needed to go to a relative's christening, a baby's christening. And I went there and I actually served at the altar at Mariam Sion. And when they asked me to speak, I said, it was such a great honor for me to be able to serve with these clergy that I knew and I respected. I have immense respect for the clergy that served there. They were all great fathers and brothers. But not being able to serve with them before, having the schism go away, you can only imagine how deeply that affected me. That was a great privilege. And that's true across the church. People who were separated, mostly clergy, were able to come together. And yes, I remember that moment when the end of the schism was announced in Washington, D.C. It was a monumental moment for all of us. It was a huge relief and a huge happiness that's really indescribable. There are certain moments in my life that I feel like, wow, this is history. That was definitely one of them. That was a big one of them.
Very emotional. As we know, the Russian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, the Russian Eastern Church, not Tewahedo, but the Russian Eastern Orthodox went through what we went through for not only 26 years, but 80 years plus. But they were able to unite again. But one thing that I've noticed and seen in their structure, and where when they united, they didn't just announce it, but they did a lot of structural reforms. When I mean reforms, is structural reforms, so that will never happen again, right? So they could be strengthened, and so that politics won't play another division or schism again. I don't think we did that when it comes to Ethiopia. It was a great, of course, moment when we saw Biswa Abuna Abraham, especially I could picture it today with Abuna Isaac and Abuna Gostos and the 6 bishops that were there. And when they when they announced that the schism would be over and that both patriarchs would be recognized, and the prime minister, of course, was sitting there with them. That was an amazing day. That was an historical, amazing day. It was tearful. Again, like I told you, this meant a lot to me personally because it personally hit. For you, you mentioned that it was hard and it was sad that you couldn't serve with the fathers that you wanted to. The same thing I felt, but also growing up in Debre Salam Madinam Church in Minnesota. That was that's where my identity is. That's where I found not only orthodoxy, but that's where I found who Ephraim is, who I am. It's everything to me. But when I traveled around the States or other churches, when I hear your church is Geltenya or your church is that, I took that personally as an attack in to my mother church, right? It's as if you go out and your mother is being insulted by others, and you can't, that takes a toll on you. For growing up for 19 years as a deacon, that's how I felt. Like I felt that when is that going to change? And I personally made it my everyday prayer for this, to see this unity, even though I never thought it would happen the way it did in our age and actually short time, 26 years compared to 80 years, and compared to how much hatred has been, divisive hatred has been installed within each other, embedded in our politics. It was a short time, I could say. So when that happened, I was, I was overwhelmed. I was happy, but I don't think we did enough after that. Like, what's the next step? Okay, this schism happened. We're united. Is the only thing we really did is we have 10 archdioceses now in America. In my opinion, I don't think that's even the way we should have gone. But Esti, tell us what things did we not do? Again, we're seeing another, unfortunately, hopefully not, but something that will look like another division if we keep only getting out and being ethnically divided, clergy-wise, where we have the Oromo Beta Knet and then the Tigray Beta Knet, and then the so-called that will come afterwards. If we're going to continue this way, where's the healing? Where's the unity? So, do you think we did enough? From your historical knowledge and to what it's happening now, do you think we've done enough, or what should we do in the future so that this won't happen?
I agree. I don't think we did enough. The problem is that there have been a lot of things that have happened that have taken attention away from this issue. As you know, after the schism ended, it seems that persecution of Ethiopian Orthodox faithful in Ethiopia is at an all-time high. You have churches being burned and people being killed just because of their identity. And that has taken a lot of attention away from these administrative issues that are very real and very dangerous. So that, I can't blame the fathers too much. They have things coming at them all the time. There's a fight here, there's a war here, there's the massacre here, there's this there. So these administrative things have taken kind of a back seat, but I don't think they can let it go for much longer. I think it needs to be clear what the responsibilities are of every part of the church structure in North America and in the world outside of Ethiopia, because the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is truly an international church now. It is not just about Ethiopia. There are people living in Canada, in Sweden, in Germany, in Britain, in the United States, in Jamaica, who all need to be part of a structure, of an organized structure. If you go to we talked to you earlier about the Coptic Church, about the Armenians. They maintain their church structure regardless of where it is. So we need to have an established church structure which says these are the responsibilities of the Archbishop that cannot be encroached upon. These are the responsibilities of the parish council or the board of trustees, or whatever we're calling it. This is their responsibilities. These are their rights that they have reserved to them. It has to be clear. It has to be clear who the clergy are reporting to. The clergy, in my opinion, can only report to other clergy. The deacon reports to his priest. The priest reports to the bishop. The bishop reports to the Holy Synod. That line of authority has to be clear. What does the board do? What does the board administrate? That needs to be clear. Who owns the church? Who owns the physical property? All of these things need to be put into the same type of structure. It cannot be different in Los Angeles than it is in Washington, D.C. There needs to be an overreaching rules that governs the church everywhere. The Roman Catholic Church is a good example for this. There's never any kind of dispute along these lines in the Roman Catholic Church. Of course, the Roman Catholic Church is a different church, but organizationally, there's no reason why an Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo diocese cannot operate like a Roman Catholic diocese. The Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of North America, good example. The Armenians had a split as well that they healed, and they're structured a little differently, but those churches all follow the same structure within their hierarchies, and we need to establish that and firm that up, because all these other problems might go away, but as long as this problem exists, there's always potential for future problems to affect us in the way that we discussed before. And it's dangerous, and it needs to be done. It can only come from the Holy Synod. And I think the Holy Synod should involve the church councils on the parish level. I think churches here in the US should be represented in Addis and give their views. But I think there needs to be agreement that the governing body of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is the Holy Synod and not some committee of people. I once heard, everybody loves democracy. Everybody wants democracy. Everybody wants to include as many people. But the kingdom of God is not a democracy. It's a monarchy. And we have to be aware of that. And when we recognize a church, when we belong to the church, we need to follow its rules and follow its traditions. If we're Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Christians, we need to submit to that authority because Christ is the king here. I'm not the king. I'm not the elected senator. I'm a servant of Christ. And every person, whether he's a patriarch or a bishop or a priest or a deacon or a choir member or just a member of the church, everyone has their role in that structure. And that just needs to be made clear, I think.
Beautifully said, Diakon Solomon. I wouldn't add any more to this. Since we're running out of time, we will continue this. And a lot of people are texting us that we should do more on these historical conversations about our church and our country because it is much needed. So even though it's not enough, we've talked much for today on how with the EOTC structure should be protected so this thing won't happen in the future. And my brother Diakon Giza was also mentioning that Malaka Gannat Gazaing that you mentioned, the father, he was on Adebabay last time, and they had the same conversation with Abuna Theophilos, explaining what we need to do moving forward, that so these things won't happen in the future. So now let's go back to the English speaking missionary here in the EOTC that has been forgotten since, again, after Abuna Isaac. And a lot of times when we say English program, right away what in people's mind comes is the youth, right? That's the youth. That's it. That's religiotional. And even with Viewer Digest, that's some of the things that we're still struggling with. And eventually it will be okay. It will be better in the future. But when we speak English, there's this mentality that it's only for the youth, right? It's only for the youth. But the Ethiopian Orthodox Church actually started its mission in English, at least here in the United States, like we mentioned, with Bob Marley and his whole family and the Jamaican, like with what Abuna Isaac did. He started it at the time. There was no children of Ethiopians to worry about. It was actually, he started it for them. It's not, but a lot of people think that, okay, I guess the English program needs to be done because we have kids. No. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church is not only for the Ethiopians, but it's for the world. We need to lighten this world to the world. And this is the reason we're doing it today as we commemorate Black History Month in February. This church should have been to all African Americans. And Diakon Solomon, you know more than me. One thing that aches me when I learn a lot about the icons, especially with Malcolm X and a lot of the prominent African American great leaders of the 50s and 60s, some of them changed their religion because they thought Christianity was a religion of the white men, because they were taught that as slaves in the United States. So it was like hidden code that slavery was okay against. So they thought the Bible spoke against them, the Christianity was against them. So we've lost a lot of souls because of that. Imagine what the role that we could have played. Even to this day, to our existence here in the United States have been for the last 50 years, right? At least for the last 50 years, but at least the last 30 years we've grown drastically. But how much have we done for the African American community, for all non-Ethiopian community, basically, to the world? How much mission work have we done? Again, the answer is almost none, 0 to none. So what can we do in the future? Is this service only for the youth, or what can the church do when it comes to continuing what Abuna Isaac started?
So that's very, very, very legitimate. Our English service is geared to Ethiopian American youth or diaspora Ethiopian youth, and it shouldn't be. It should be geared to all people who are open to the message that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is delivering. Abune Isaac, did a great deal, and I want to point also to his activities in South Africa, where he really grew the church among South Africans because of his abilities to reach out. We need to reach out. There was a longtime member of our church here in New York who passed away just within the last couple of months. His name was Richard Ford, or Haida Michael Ford. People at our church will remember him. Mr. Ford was the nephew of Mrs. Eileen Ford, who was the longtime directress of the Princess Zanebua School in Addis. So they're very connected to Ethiopia. And he was a devoted member of our church. And he would come every Sunday. And there are other members of our church who are English speaking and speak no Amharic or very little, who come every week and they worship, not understanding a single word. So he would constantly remind us, the priests and the deacons, even writing letters to us and handing them to us saying, when you do the Bible readings, can you just tell us what the readings are in English? We are so neglectful that we don't even give them the Bible readings in English. We need to be more open in that way. And so in our church, we do say which Bible reading it is and what chapter, what verse. But Mr. Ford was constantly asking us to do this. We really do have to minister to the original recipients of the mission in the West. We should have grown by now. We should have been a much larger community. As far as we cannot be so insular. People in their nature are kind of tribal. We kind of want to be around people that are like us. But we're also living in a society that's much more open, much more broad than just our Ethiopian community. And those people need what we have as well. They need the spirituality of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. So it can speak to them in their daily experience just as much as it speaks to us. And the mission of Christ on earth was not specifically for the Ethiopian people, was not specifically to a certain ethnic group. It was for all people. So we need to take this message to the broader community. We are very lucky in that we have the Holy Liturgy of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. One of our richest properties is our liturgy. It's been translated into English. That in itself is such a tool to have an English liturgy to pull in people that are not necessarily of an Ethiopian background so that they understand what we're saying and how we worship. It's such a useful tool. It was translated by Father Marcos Daud, who is a Coptic priest who was visiting Ethiopia and wanted, because Ethiopia had 14 anaphoras and the Egyptians had lost most of theirs, and they wanted a translation of the other anaphoras that they no longer had. He did a translation into Arabic and Coptic, but then said, might as well translate it into English as well, and a very good English translation, I have to say. It's just as beautiful in English. We have that tool. We should use that tool. We should allow people to worship in English, and invite people that are not necessarily connected. I mean, we have the Afro-Caribbean community that loves us and wants to be part of us. And we have our English-speaking youth who want to know their religion and their traditions and their history, and they come. But we need to be broader. We need to attract and not just African Americans. There are a lot of people. There are Copts who might want to come. There are Syrians who might want to come. There are Armenians who might want to come and worship with us. And we share a faith. There are differences, but we share the same faith. We're in communion with each other, and they should be able to and come and understand. It widens our ministry. We talked earlier about how we have all these churches all over the country, beautiful, magnificent churches, but we don't have the schools. We don't have the schools. We should build more schools. The classroom needs, and it's important to teach our own youth, but those schools can be used to teach the community as well. We need to be part of the communities we live in. We can't be a divorced little walled off church that's just for us, because heaven isn't just for us. We need to open our doors.
It's like how when Ermias had said, it's rather for us to go back in the old days of living in huts and having big churches, but not having people to be faithful in them. So he's talking about we need to educate the youth. So beautifully well said. Thank you, Diakon Solomon. And again, this is almost the whole conversation for an hour and 50 minutes have mostly been just an introduction of the many deep things that deeper conversations that we will have in the future. Some of the comments that were coming, I was seeing our sister Tirsit was saying it's 2 a.m. from where I am, but it is worth watching this great conversation, and so people have been indulging very well with you, Diakon Solomon, and thank you so much for your time, for coming to Adebabay Media and sharing your story, your growth, and your ideas on how we should all together as EOTC Apostolic Mission here in the United States, how we could grow together. Again, thank you. If any last thoughts, I will give it to you, and then we're going to do a little short tribute to our sister Ruth that we've lost this week.
Certainly, yes. I want to thank you for inviting me on this program. I'm deeply honored. There are a lot of people, a lot of servants of the church who are probably more deserving and more articulate and could explain these things more. But I'm very honored that you asked me, and I'm glad to join the conversation at any time. I just want to make one more note about we talked about art. We are all guilty of you see in my background I have an icon of the Virgin Mary and another picture also of the Virgin Mary from two different cultures. But we need to have more of our own. We need to promote our own traditions, our own religious art, and it's not just the art, but the teachings of our church are so multi-leveled, and it's so important to focus on them and not so much on all the things that divide us. We should look at our commonalities and our faith and the kingdom of God. So thank you again. Thank you very much for having me on, and I'm glad to join at any time.
It is my pleasure, Diakon Solomon. Thank you again for sharing all your wisdom. Again, this is our first, right? Our first of many?
Yes.
Thank you. Brothers and sisters of Eurodigest Adebabay Media family, as we all know, this week has been a very difficult week for many of us that have been touched by our sister Ruth Dedeje passing away in February 15, 2021. What I will do as a tribute to her here at Adebabay Media, since I am an Adebabay Media, I'm part of the Adebabay Media member and also part of UOTY member. I will read the tribute, small tribute that was written for Ruth Dedeje right after we heard of her passing away. Before I read, though, Ruth Dedeje has impacted so many lives positively, and how did I know that? Is I knew first. Knowing her for a little bit for about 3.5 years, and it's through services. She is part of YOTC member, but she's always been behind the scenes helping me with UOTY, helping us with UOTY and advising us, and always there with ideas of what to do to organize the youth. Her light, I believe, have been seen more after her passing away, when I've seen so many people that don't even know her, but when they hear her story, when they hear the way the lifestyle she carried on as a teenager. She was only 19 years old, a 4.3 GPA valedictorian of her class, heading to one of the most prestigious colleges that all accepted her, and she was in the process of choosing that when cancer hit her. But even through all those struggles and tribulations, she was a woman. She was a woman that kept her life under taking the Holy Eucharist every Sunday service. She was all about Zema. She loved Zema. She loved Mazmur. Even from one of the testimonies that I heard this week, her Nisa Abbat, actually, her repentance father, Qasis Tashoma, in his writing, he told us that one day, 24 hours before her passing away, she had a Zammari sing to her favorite Mazmurs while she's in bed to take her last breath, and that happened one day before her passing away. These stories, and another story that I heard from our own teacher, that had actually went through. She's a survivor of cancer as well, brain tumor survivor. One thing she said in her post, on her post, she said how much her faith, that she can't even understand the depth of Ruth's faith. And that reminded me of the three youth, and majority of the Bible, as we know, in the Old Testament and the New Testament, it's stories of the saints, right? Of how they were able to overcome this world through Christ. And if you remember, the three youth were not only faithful to their religion, to their upbringing, but they were able to change the mentality of the king himself, that does not believe. He's a pagan that does not believe in the God of Abraham, but he was able to honor the God of Abraham, to honor their God. So saints are able to change. Righteous people are able to not only change their community, their church, but the world. They're able to impact and touch those that are non-believers or outside. And this teacher, and I'm not saying she's not a believer, but she says her faith, the way she lived her faith, the way she carried her faith, she can't even understand. The depthness of her faith. So I'm just going to read what UOTY had released once we heard of her passing away. As we all heard by now, one of our own, Ruth Deraja, has passed away in February 15, 2021. From the many testimonies we have been hearing about in the past now 6 days, Ruth Deraja has touched so many lives. Her zeal for service and love for her community is unmatched. She never got a chance to attend one of our annual conferences, but Ruth was always there with bright ideas and support for youth service since its inception. And this is from this perspective of UOTY, but she's part of YOTC and their services, and they've held a very I think they have a vigil coming up, I believe tomorrow, at 5 p.m. Eastern time. If you want to catch that, and her burial happened on Saturday, so this is speaking afterwards. She never got a chance to attend one of our annual conferences, but Ruth was always there with bright ideas and support for youth service since its inception. Before starting to battle cancer, she was working on a mini English EOTC lectionary, which is Gitsawi, so kids can easily find daily readings at home. And during liturgy, Ruth Deraja's mini English EOTC lectionary, so kids could easily find daily readings at home and during liturgy. Ruth Deraja is the embodiment of what kind of a youth servant we shall all aspire to be. Not only her service to the church, but her kindness, her God-fearing and human-loving soul will forever be in our hearts. Ruth Deraja was a valedictorian of her class, preparing to begin her college years to one of the many prestigious colleges that accepted her with open arms. The Almighty God, who is always right, wanted her to come home soon. Please continue praying for her parents, her family, and everyone touched by her loss. Reach out to one another and comfort each other at this moment. Our condolence prayer goes out to her grieving parents and everyone that have been hurt by this loss. But we all know and believe today Ruth lives with the Lord that she loved her entire life. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much again for all of you for tuning in again. My brother Diakon Solomon, thank you for being with all of us throughout this time. Do you want to say any words before we close up what I just read? I don't want to.
Yeah, well, I think we've pretty much covered everything. That those pictures there are a nice memory for me. The Crown Council of Ethiopia had awarded me the Star of Honor of Ethiopia for services in promoting Ethiopian culture and history, and those are the pictures there. There I'm with Prince Ermias and his sons, Prince Christian and Prince Rufai, in Washington, D.C., receiving that honor. And the other picture was with my fellow awardees. Yes, there you have the Tadla Malaku and the Nabi, and the mission of spreading the Ethiopian story, the accurate Ethiopian history is never ending, and it's a service that I love, but I think it's a responsibility of all of us to find truth, whether it's truth in the church or truth in history. I think that's important for all of us. So I encourage everyone to do their part.
Thank you, Diakon Solomon. And brothers and sisters, what we just did at the last pictures is just to give you a little bit of a taste of what's to come, part 2. We've learned a lot about Diakon Solomon's journey in Beta Knet. Now we're going to go further and talk about more on his side of Beta Mengist that we haven't really touched on. It kind of goes hand to hand, especially at the time. But you're also involved with like Ethiopian politics and American politics and what's going on around the world. And so we will discuss on that part of history as well in our next program that we will, many more programs that we will have with you, Diakon Solomon. Again, thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you. And good night, everybody. We'll see you again next Sunday.
አደባባይ ሚዲያ የተለያዩ ወቅታዊ ዜናዎችን፣ ውይይቶችን፣ አዝናኝና አስተማሪ ዝግጅቶችን በማቅረብ 1 ዓመታትን አስቆጠረ። አደባባይ ሚዲያ ውድ የአደባባይ ሚዲያ ቤተሰቦች እንኳን አንደኛ ዓመት በዓላችን በሰላም አደረሰን እያለን በአንድ ዓመት ጉዞዎች ከወገንተኝነት በጸዳ በሀገራችን ላይ የተከሰቱ ክስተቶችን በማጋራት ከአድማጭ ተመልካቾች ጋር መልካም ጉዞን አሳልፈናል። ቀጣይ ዓመታትን በሚሰጡን ግንባር አስተያየቶች እናንተው ጋር ቀርበን የህዝብ ወገንተኝነትን በማሳየት ቀሪ ጉዞአችንን በስኬት ለመቀጠል አደባባይ ሚዲያ ቆርጦ ተነስተዋል። ለምትደግፉን ውድ የአደባባይ ሚዲያ ቤተሰቦች ከልብ እያመሰገንን ቀሪ ዓመታትን